Godly Playland. It's Miss Helen. We're going to be starting a new unit that Miss Becky and I have been thinking about. We decided it might be nice if we learned a little bit together about our church, and specifically the Methodist Church. I don't know if you've ever thought about this, but if you drive around, you see all sorts of different churches. And ours is called the Methodist Church. And it was started a long, long time ago in the 1700s by a man whose name was John Wesley. Now we're going to be telling you all sorts of things about John Wesley and about the church itself and what makes it different from other churches. But tonight I wanted to tell you a little bit about his family, because his family was quite interesting and had quite a few very amazing people in it. The first thing that's amazing about John Wesley's family is how many children there were. His mother had 19 children. 19. That's a lot of children. Now, back in those days, a lot of times children didn't live to grow up because there were a lot of diseases and things, and we didn't have the sort of treatments that we do now. So only 10 of John Wesley's siblings, well, including himself, lived to be adults. But still, 10 children, that would be a lot. The siblings that I remember from reading about him that were kind of stood out a little bit, I'd always heard of his two brothers, Samuel and Charles. Samuel was a pastor with the Church of England, which is the biggest church in England. And he also was a poet. And Charles Wesley wrote a lot of hymns. In fact, he wrote over 6,000 hymns. And when I was thinking about this, I decided to get a hymnal and just go through and see how many hymns there were that were written by Charles Wesley, and look what I found. I don't know if you can see how many cards those are, and some of these pages have a hymn by Charles Wesley on the right side and a hymn by Charles Wesley on the left side. So those cards don't even tell the whole story. And some of the hymns are really things that you're very familiar with, like the song we always sing on Easter, Christ the Lord is risen today. That was written by Charles Wesley. They also had a sister named Mehitabel who was a poet. But I think the most amazing person in John Wesley's family was his mother. His mother's name was Susanna. And her father was also a pastor, but he was what's called a nonconformist. He did not really belong to the Church of England. He disagreed with them on a lot of different things, and so he set up his own church. And Susanna was obviously a person who knew her own mind, because when she was 13 years old, she decided that she didn't want to go to her father's church, and she instead went back to the Church of England. She got married to a pastor when she was just 19. She was a very well-educated person, particularly for those days when women often did not get much of an education. And that was one of the most important things to her. When her children turned 5, she started on their education. She felt that they shouldn't have any sort of lessons before they were 5, but the day after their 5th birthday, they would start learning from their mother. And she taught them Greek and Latin, and she taught that to the girls as well as the boys. Those were the things that you learned in those days if you were going to be a scholar. And having taken Latin a very long, long time ago, I can tell you those things are pretty difficult. She was really a person who knew her own mind, just as you could tell when she was 13, and she started going back to the Church of England, despite what I'm sure was her father's displeasure. She, at one point, her husband was away, and there was a substitute pastor, and his sermons were just terrible. He always talked about the same thing. And Susanna thought that these were not very good sermons, and she wanted her family to hear something better. So she started to have little services of her own in the afternoon. And pretty soon, other people heard about them and the neighbors would drop in. And pretty soon, her little afternoon church services were drawing 200 people, and the substitute pastor had hardly anybody at his services. So John Wesley was the 15th of those 19 children. And next week, you're going to hear some stories about when he was a little boy from Miss Becky. So until then, I hope you have a good week. And you might want to maybe ask your parents a few things about what they know about the Methodist Church and what they know about the Methodist Church that makes it a little different from other churches, and why maybe our church is a little different even from some other Methodist churches. All right, goodbye. Hope to see you soon.